Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 153, recording on Tuesday, March 31st from Phoenix, Arizona. I am looking out. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see my eyes gazing out the window, looking at the mountains here for the NFL owners meetings. And we'll begin with a little bit of what the owners meetings is and how it works for someone in my position. But it's always a great time. Probably the most relaxed off-season event of the year. Just where everybody's kind of free agency's done. People are getting ready for the draft, but haven't really dug directly into draft meetings. And I think everyone has a pretty good feel for where their team is and where they want to take it. So it was awesome. Got to sit with Kevin O'Connell, Mark Wilf, Rob Brzezinski, the Vikings interim. Mark Wilf had some of his children here. So did Ziggy Wilf. So anybody and everybody, Andrew Miller, the chief operating officer, he was there. So anybody associated with this team that is involved with decision making was here in Arizona, and it was fun to be here. Like I said, we'll talk about the owners' meetings, get into some of the quarterback conversation, Kyler Murray and what was said about him. JJ McCarthy had a couple tidbits about JJ. Jonathan Greenard was a big discussion point. Jordan Addison's fifth-year option. Blake Brandell at center and potentially drafting a center. Darisaw, Rob Brzezinski, the opportunity that he might have, or whether he wants to be the full-time guy. Frank Smith. I mean, a lot of different topics that we'll hit over the course of this show. Rather than take questions, I thought I'd just unload the notebook per se of everything that I acquired and that I thought was interesting from down here in Arizona. As always, if you're new here and watch on YouTube, you don't know about us, I cover the Vikings for The Athletic, host this show twice a week, every single week, wherever you can get your podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button. Excuse me. It helps us out a ton. We've had a blast building this thing. And then if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart, hit the 5 stars, follow us. We appreciate that stuff a ton as well. The show is presented by First Resource Bank. If you don't know about First Resource Bank and you've listened to this podcast, you're just not doing your due diligence. These guys are big Vikings fans. They care about the community. It is a member FDIC bank with online options with a phenomenal online banking platform. Makes it easy to figure out direct deposit, all of the good stuff that you want from a banking platform. First Resource has that. So please go check them out. All right. So what is the owners meeting? You guys are working out, driving around, sitting at home, listening to this. You're like, what is that? All the owners? Yeah. All of the NFL owners are there. I mean, you'll be walking around the hotel. And I mean, there was one year where I backed out. I got out of the bathroom and Jerry Jones was walking in. And for some reason, we were in the same hotel, using similar, I would say, bathroom equipment. I don't know where I'm going with that. But yeah, like I earlier today, I was sitting writing kind of outside of the little pool bar for a second. And I heard this voice behind me. And it was this like, yeah. And I'm like, that is such a familiar voice. I turn around. It's literally Sean McVay talking to somebody right over my left shoulder. Then Liam Cohen comes up, the coach of the Jaguars, daps up Sean McVay. Then here comes Matt LaFleur, and here their wives. And that's really what it is. I mean, the Detroit Tigers were staying at this hotel. So you see Justin Verlander walking around. You got the whole Pat McAfee show, ESPN cast. I mean, it was and always is absurd. But again, as I said at the top, like everyone's in pretty good moods. The weather's phenomenal. It's a pretty relaxed environment. So it's really, really fun. But yeah, the stories of this thing are endless. They do a party for all of everyone who's there on Monday night each year. And it's open bars, it's family members, it's everybody. They got a band out there. So fortunate to be a part of it. Never take it for granted. Absolutely grateful for the opportunity. But we'll begin with the Vikings specific commentary, talking about the quarterback, obviously. And one of the first questions, so every year there's a morning where all the coaches meet with writers at a breakfast. So we're at this ballroom round table. Kevin O'Connell comes and sits down, and then it's like 30 minutes of just Q&A with writers, mostly local, some national. And one of the first questions to him at that breakfast, which was getting roasted by my colleagues for eating bacon and cantaloupe. That's all I had on my breakfast. Highly embarrassing, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do. Didn't want to overeat. One of the questions of Kevin O'Connell was, hey, so there's been a lot of conversation, obviously, about the fit with your scheme and with Kyler Murray's play style. How do you see that fit? Essentially, like, Kevin, you've heard all this noise, I'm sure. Like, what is your response? How do you feel about it? And Kevin O'Connell, from the very beginning, made a point where it's like, hey, I don't think, Kyler Murray has gotten enough credit for his ability to play in rhythm and on time and to make throws from the pocket. And so, like, it was an interesting place to start. I think on Tuesday morning, Dan Orlovsky was on ESPN and had a lot of conversation about this. But, and I think Dan was talking through this. He called it a marriage and how this very well choreographed design scheme is going to fit with this playmaking out of structure style player. And as I saw some of the commentary from Dan, and I quote tweeted some of it, and I'm like, look, both of these guys, and I came away understanding this like very specifically, very from a detailed standpoint. Both these guys, in terms of Kevin O'Connell as a coach and play caller and play designer, and Kyler Murray as a quarterback stepping in here, they both have strengths, and they both are prepared, motivated, and sharp enough to know that they both are going to have to adapt in some form or fashion. From Kevin O'Connell's standpoint, if that means different formations and usage of more shotgun or pistol in different scenarios, it is my understanding that he and this Vikings offensive staff is prepared to meet Kyler at that spot. If it's Kyler Murray having to adapt in the sense that he's okay playing more under center, that he is having to push the ball down the field, like, it's my understanding that he wants to do everything in his power to meet the Vikings and the Vikings staff and Kevin O'Connell at how they want to run their system. I also said in the tweet, like, these are two, and Kevin O'Connell and Kyler Murray, these are two smart and motivated people. And I think, with Kyler Murray, one of the things that I've gathered talking to people who have spent time around him in Arizona over the last couple of weeks is, like, because of the narrative of the study clause and the Call of Duty, I think there is like a perception of Kyler Murray that he's, I don't know if the word would be like not smart or unintelligent. And you talk to people who have spent time with him, like, it couldn't be further from the truth in the sense that he is extremely observant. Like, the verbiage of play calls has not been too much for him. Understanding decision making at the line of scrimmage has not been too much for him. From a studying perspective, there's part of it where, like, again, and this is from talking to people who spent time around him in Arizona, like, I think there are times where he doesn't have to do as much as others because of the level of intelligence. And I know that's probably, to some of you listening who are negative on Kyler or have a perception of him, that's probably going to sound crazy, but like the way and I've talked about this before, and it's with every player that I cover, every coach that I cover, everybody, like, the way I do the job is, and this was very much the same with Sam Darnold. When the Vikings signed Sam Darnold, there were so many narratives around him and the chasing ghosts and seeing ghosts and all of that stuff was like how everyone thought about Sam Darnold nationally. And I viewed it as my responsibility, because I'm a reporter and I have the latitude to do it. Like, I'm going to reach out to people who really know these guys and see how much of their experience, their anecdotes matches with some of the narrative. And I'd say, I mean, there was one person I've talked to who would know. And I asked, like, when you first think of Kyler, what do you think? And the first word they used was the word misunderstood. And I think that was, I thought that was really interesting. But to get it back to this conversation, like, there is a lot of, and there has been a lot of conversation with Kevin O'Connell about, like, adapting the offense. And I would say that one of, like, any good coach, you have to adapt to a player's strong suit, and you have to decipher, like, with that player, what do they actually prefer? What is going to position them in the best scenario? And I think part of why Kevin O'Connell has the respect of people externally is because he's shown a willingness to do that. I'd say one of his onboarding processes with young quarterbacks is to sit, or with young quarterbacks, any quarterbacks, is sit with them, watch the film, go through it in detail, and try to use that space in that realm to establish trust and start to learn of like, okay, what does this guy really like versus, what don't they? I think it's harder to see because you almost have to have a really highly trained eye to notice differences. But the offense that Kirk ran in Minnesota wasn't the exact same from what Sam ran in Minnesota. Now the production it rose to a certain level. I think there was a lot of consistency with wanting to throw the football down the field, but last year, I think a lot of people, and I also I've talked about, it seemed like a real grind down the back half of the season to, you know, use different formations, different personnel groupings, and I think the perception there is that Kevin O'Connell just hates changing his specific offense, whereas I think probably more of what the reality is Kevin O'Connell is okay adapting, being creative, as long as the principles of being able to attack split safety coverage to get the ball to Justin Jefferson, if that stuff can still exist, like they are willing to be creative in some form or fashion. I've also heard a lot of and this is not to dismiss all of it, because the results are ultimately going to tell us and show us how much adaptability each side has and whether that can work or not. But like Josh Dobbs and the inability to produce more with him over the course of a longer span of time than those first couple of games. I mean, whereas now the Vikings have an entire offseason to kind of reshape, rethink, restructure, be creative with their offensive design. I mean, it's really hard to do that in the middle of the season where all of the other pieces of the offense have learned a specific system. So that was kind of my thoughts and takeaway from some of that. Again, to reiterate and underline it at the end, I mean, they're both of these guys, they're going to have to prove it. But I came away from being here in Arizona and having these conversations thinking that Kevin O'Connell very much understands that it is going to be his responsibility to assess Kyler's best strengths. And if he is indeed the starter come week 1 in September, being able to maximize their structure of offense in whatever form or fashion that takes on around Kyler's strengths, like that he views that as his responsibility. And then again, the results one way or another will speak for themselves. So that's where I'll start. As far as JJ McCarthy, like there wasn't a ton of I would say revelatory detail on JJ McCarthy and the time he spent with John Beck, who was the private quarterbacks coach out in California. Kevin O'Connell did say that JJ McCarthy is back in Minnesota. He's been working out in the building, like under the rules that they are able to, mostly with the strength and conditioning staff. But I mean, Kevin O'Connell talked about feeling like JJ has kind of a new perspective, another season, another months being healthy, and just the opportunity is going to be there for JJ McCarthy to prove it every single day. And that's prove it in how you show up to the building, prove it in how you operate within the building. It's prove it on the field when the opportunities exist. I mean, this spring and summer, like it's going to be fun, and I can't wait to be out on the field at TCO Performance Center, just kind of evaluating the quarterbacks and how they're trying to develop each guy individually. But I would expect in the spring and summer, and it just sounds like there's going to be a lot of opportunity routes on air for all of these guys, including Carson Wentz, to throw to a lot of the receivers. And the way Kevin O'Connell talked about it kind of sounded like Justin Jefferson would be a part of some of the voluntary stuff. Again, I think that would be really productive. I'm going to have a little nugget, a little more on this probably towards the end of the podcast. But what I would say is that, like, it's going to be hard probably for me, for others. Like, you're going to see highlights and throws and stuff from late, early May after the draft when there's mini camps and all that stuff. It's going to be hard not to make rash judgments on some of those like minor clips and stuff. But I would expect all these guys to get a lot of opportunity throwing time in the spring and summer. And then in training camp, I mean, because Carson Wentz showed last year that he could step in and operate an offense without the Vikings training camp at all, I don't believe he's going to need a ton of reps. And so then you would imagine Kevin O'Connell, with the experience of the last couple of years, will be able to dispose reps to Kyler Murray and then JJ McCarthy from a developmental standpoint. Like, I think those reps will be pretty important, and that will become the time where Kevin O'Connell even said this, where it will make sense to track. Okay, who's running with the first team? How many reps are they getting? How do they look? Like those reps look. That's kind of how I view that. But for JJ McCarthy, like it's you go back to how the Vikings wanted it to go that first year. And they really, part of the reason they signed Sam Darnold and Sam was willing to sign in Minnesota was because it was with the understanding that Sam, look, you're probably going to start, and JJ, you're going to probably run some of the scout team stuff to be able to trial and error certain throws, certain aspects of the system. He never got that time. And so I kind of view, at least me specifically, I can only speak for myself. Like, I kind of view this spring and summer as time for him to kind of, be on the driving range and work through a lot of those components and just prove it every single day. And I get that everyone wants, or has polar. You guys listening probably have really strong and polar opinions on JJ, but I mean, again, I've said it many times. This dude is a 23-year-old who has played 10 games in the NFL, and if you think that what you've seen categorizes him as a bust or a future star, just not enough information. And so, like, any information you can get on him through any reps and opportunities in competitive environments among teammates, like, I think that stuff, that stuff will be pretty important. On Jonathan Greenard, both Rob Brzezinski and Kevin O'Connell made it pretty clear, like, they don't want to trade him. And they never have. And I think I've probably said this many times on the show. Like, the Vikings love Jonathan Greenard. They value him immensely as a player. We could talk about the sack production dipping from 2024 to 2025, or we could talk about how the advanced metrics were actually great, or we could talk about the injuries over time, or wanting, somewhat of a rework contract. But essentially, in the Vikings, in the way they want to go about these types of conversations, negotiations with players and agents, like, they came to a conclusion where it was like, look, Jonathan and his agent Drew Rosenhaus, if you guys want a certain deal that we aren't fully ready and prepared to offer you right now, and you think you can get that from another team, then we will be open to a trade so that you can have conversations with these other teams and see if there is another team willing to pay you what you feel like you deserve and pay us the draft capital that we want for you. And so that's really, I mean, that's what's happened. I wrote this last week, but I had someone in another organization that kicked the tires on this, say that the contract that Jonathan Greenard and Drew Rosenhaus were looking for was the primary hurdle within this that removed them from wanting to pursue it further. So, I mean, we'll just see. I mean, Kevin O'Connell said he expects Jonathan Greenard to be a part of this thing in 2026. He also did say, conversations happen. So perhaps if a team that wants an edge rusher in the draft swings and misses, or doesn't come away with another veteran, and they just decide to really overpay for it, like you never rule out that possibility. But I mean, I just think about last year, Josh Metellus, who was also represented by Drew Rosenhaus, comes to training camp, practice a little bit, not a ton, and then they eventually met and found the right kind of number. And so if that were to be the path that this thing goes down, I wouldn't be crazy surprised. I asked Kevin O'Connell about the center position. The first name out of his mouth was Blake Brandel. And he's like, look, over time, we love his versatility. We love his flexibility. But for Blake's future, it probably would benefit him to just spend all his time allocating on one spot. And Blake had never played center, stepped in last year and looked pretty solid. And I'll probably go back and rewatch that tape soon because I'm fascinated about it. So I think Blake Brandel will definitely be an option at center for 2026. Kevin did also mention Michael Juergens, who I think would definitely be depth there. And then Kevin didn't shy away from the fact that they do like a lot of these centers in the draft. And so that, I mean, I'd be pretty surprised if the Vikings come away from late April without a center, because there are a ton of names and you could rattle all them off, the Iowa Logan Joneses of the world, I mean, I don't know, Florida's Jake Slaughter and Kansas State's Sam Heck. They're all kind of a different flavor. I've mentioned a lot of them. I'll continue to and dive deeper on some of these guys, but would be pretty surprised if there wasn't that level of player in the middle rounds at the very least. That kind of makes sense. Christian Darrisaw, it sounds like Kevin O'Connell did not mince words of how important he feels Christian Darrisaw and him playing 17 games is. He didn't have a definitive kind of look at like what the practice schedule for Christian will be like, but look, he'll be almost 2 years come September removed from the torn ACL, and obviously it was a brutal injury and affected Christian throughout the 2025 season. But having this guy full go would just be such a massive boon for this offense. And I'm of the belief that, I mean, outside of the quarterback position, like that is probably offensively the most important situation, more than receiver depth or even probably what happens at center or running back, all of that. Like I probably not surprisingly to any of you guys think so highly of what Christian can be when he is healthy and how important that can be for the entire offense that wants to attack vertically. And I think like I've done a lot of thought on, the Vikings and Kevin O'Connell wanting to throw the ball deep. And you peel the layers back a little bit. It's like, they face split safety, too high safety coverage at one of the highest rates in the NFL. One of the ways to beat that coverage is to kind of like, spread out the defense and kind of hit them in the intermediate areas. And doing that often requires receivers to get downfield, which requires pass protection time. And so I guess like one of the interesting layers of Kyler Murray is if his athleticism is a dynamic ability that forces defense to commit more to the box, then you have less of that split safety and you can probably, there's a little more free access and space underneath. So that's more of a meta conversation, but I've done a lot of thought on it and it's pretty interesting to me. Rob Brzezinski, was asked point blank, like, do you want the GM job? And he kind of laughed. He's like, I could give all the cliche answers. And then you felt like sitting there like, okay, maybe he's not going to give a cliche. And then he kind of was like, we're just focused on the present right now, which he knew was fairly cliched. I mean, Mark Wilf, when asked about Rob as a candidate, he said, after this period, when we begin our process after the draft, we'll sit down and interview and look at Rob and ask him what he wants, just like all the other guys. So that's kind of an interesting one. It remains that way. There is Rob Brzezinski, Mark Wilf made it clear when he was asked, what do you want in this GM? Like, instead of talking about personnel background or analytics or scouting experience, like the word he used was he wants a leader that can bring together the two sides of the organization from personnel and coaching staff. And as far as Rob Brzezinski goes, like, I mean, the reason he was tabbed to be the interim was because he was probably one of the few people internally that has the cachet and the experience and the tact to be able to bring those two worlds together. So, I mean, we'll continue to monitor that one, but I do think it's pretty interesting, just the way that they both kind of talked about it. I mean, Mark Wilf said after the draft, they'll be very deliberate. I don't think it's going to be a long, drawn-out process at that point. It feels like they have everything pretty much set in terms of who they want involved in the interviews, what they're after. So, yeah, I mean, after the draft, and you'll have rookie minicamp and all that stuff. Will probably be as someone who is in the media, I'll probably be after, where are they at from an interview standpoint and what are they going to do there? But both Mark Wilf and Rob Brzezinski did talk about the draft, and they talked about wanting to draft best player available. And every executive and every team says that, and they want to do that. But what I found interesting with the way that Rob has talked about it is he's like, where I've seen mistakes is when teams, because they have certain needs, they almost subconsciously bump certain prospects up at certain positions to be able, like, to where in your head you're like, oh, that guy's a better player, but really he's just propped up because he fits the position of need. And so Rob is like very steadfast about the word he's used is to be very objective about how they structure their draft board. And so obviously to be objective, you got to have good information, and that's a scouting, like that's their responsibility, is have really good information on the people and the fit. And then the coaches have been very involved, specifically on this pro day circuit. I've seen videos of Keenan McCardell everywhere. Ryan Nielsen, defensive line run game coordinator defensively, has been out and about. Assistants, a guy like Pat Hill, he's been everywhere running some of these workouts. I saw like Keith Carter, the offensive line coach, was at Alabama for the pro day. So the coaching staff has definitely been very engaged and involved with this draft process. Not that they haven't been in years past. I've made that really clear. It is also interesting, like over the past, for a long time, Rob Brzezinski on draft night and throughout the draft from Thursday to Saturday or Friday to Sunday or what have you, Rob's job within the room has been to like orchestrate trades. So that requires a lot of pre-planning on who would be willing to move up or down, what avenues are we going to have available, what does our chart say in terms of what trade value we want for picks compared to another team. And that has been like his primary responsibility, which takes some very quick and communication type skill set throughout the draft. I think a lot of that responsibility now will go to Matt Thomas, the consultant they brought in on the salary cap, Emily Battis, who's worked with Rob for a long time on the salary cap, and then Ryan Munnins, director of I believe it's director of player personnel, who has been with the Vikings for a long time and is respected in the industry by others. So and then Rob will be mostly like, it'll be a communication role on draft night and throughout the draft day, where it's like communicating with Kevin O'Connell. What do you think? Other coaches, if they have to bring them in, scouting staff to check their bases. So he will be more of like the funnel, probably, again, from coaching staff to personnel staff, to ensure that they're, as he says, like they would just want to stack good decisions. So I thought like that kind of shift in responsibility is pretty interesting. And it sounds like they're kind of finalizing their draft meetings the next couple weeks to start stacking the board. Quick little tidbit. So show sponsored by Unreal. That is a locally owned and operated clothing brand based out of St. Paul that I've been rocking here down at the owners meetings. Got a couple people asking about it. I'm like, you don't know about Unreal? You got to. They've got limited edition hoodie drops in the fall. They've done in-arena exclusives with the Wolves and the Wild that I'm trying to still get my hands on. So yeah, Unreal, put the link in the description. They've supported the show since last fall, and we appreciate them for that. Last couple things, and then we'll hop out of here, and we'll be back later in the week with a draft specific episode with one of my favorites. Kevin O'Connell at the breakfast on Monday morning was asked about Frank Smith and bringing in Frank Smith. And for those of you who don't know, this is probably a name you're going to hear a lot more throughout training camp and or throughout the summer and into training camp. So Frank Smith has been around the league for a long time. He was an O-line coach that kind of learned under a guy, Aaron Cromer, who had, until he recently retired, had done a phenomenal job in Buffalo, kind of building an offensive line for Josh Allen that is probably still under the radar in terms of the impact it's made on him and that offense, and probably helped that staff and Joe Brady like move into that role. But Frank Smith, again, has been around the league for a long time. He was most recently Mike McDaniel's right-hand guy. So working with Mike McDaniel on the run game, which was one of the most creative run games in the NFL, helping him game plan, helping to ensure that their techniques and fundamentals with the run game are really solid. And what I would say is, while Frank Smith learned under Aaron Cromer, who was a very much like under center style offense, the exposure to Mike McDaniel and the time in Miami had Frank Smith very well versed in the shotgun and the pistol. And so when you start to go back to the earlier conversation about Kyler and knowing that they're going to need to adapt in some form or fashion, I do think they now have additional brain power, I guess to use that word, or that phrasing, that will almost, and Kevin O'Connell will use the word think tank, that Kevin can defer to when need be, to ensure that if they are dipping their toes into these different types of formations or structures, that they can do it in a way that's been successful around the league. So, Mike Pettin retired and the Vikings made Frank Smith the assistant head coach. And it can be because there's a lot of titles and there's a lot of staffing. Some of them, it's like, how important or necessary is this? But it really does sound like Frank Smith is going to have a big role in this thing, the way Kevin talked about it Monday. And so, I'll be curious. You guys know, if you listen, like, I'm fascinated by scheme. I think analyzing that stuff's really important because it's such a key advantage to some teams and staffs within the NFL. So how things look in the spring and the summer, when things are more walkthrough style, and what types of strategies are they trying that maybe they haven't tried in the past? All that stuff will be fascinating. It will be fun to kind of watch the evolution per se. So wanted to say that. And then, like, there were one of, like, maybe the most underrated lines from Kevin O'Connell's 31-minute session at that breakfast that, like, you probably would have to really hear it and think about it, but he said something to the effect of, we feel like this quarterback room and the competition in there will elevate the standard for everyone else on our team. And then he said, and this was maybe the most interesting to me, and we feel like the players we have around that position will elevate that position. And so, like, you could look at that a number of ways and be interested by it a bunch of different ways. But for me, like, I thought of it in a two-pronged avenue. Like, I think in some ways it was him saying the lack of just high-end competition and standard being, like, at a really high bar the entire offseason last year may have influenced, like, the level of, I don't know, like, the way they came out of the gate last year. But then I also felt like it was Kevin O'Connell saying, because you have a guy like Justin Jefferson, who comes to practice every day like he is Jay Sean Jones on the practice squad, who I love, by the way, and works like that, like, you can feel confident that players like a Kyler Murray in a new environment will reach a certain ceiling, because you know that anything less than meeting Justin Jefferson's standard is probably going to be pretty frowned upon. And so, like, I think there's that there, Aaron Jones and how he goes about things. I think, like, that's part of the reason you bring back Aaron Jones is as much about the reliability with him as a 3-down back and as a pass catcher out of the backfield and pass protector, as it is, how that guy's going to show up in the building every single day and what that's going to drive for the people around them. So just thought that comment was telling. It's something that I'm going to think back on a lot. And, like, there's always, months from now, and I've done this over the years, like, you just think back to oftentimes these sessions and these conversations, and they inform a lot of, like, how you think about a season and how it may go or how it may not. But I did feel like everyone who talked, they were pretty energized about this thing, the direction. Rob Brzezinski made it clear that, like, they've wanted to be really focused on 2026, but also have an eye on 27 and 28, so that they have a runway to sustain and improve and not have to essentially take a hit to fall backwards. So yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think this draft is as wide open as ever. It almost, like, you can almost take best player available, or you're almost forced to when you have as many holes and depth needs as they have, to where it's like, if you're talking between tight end or edge rusher or tackle, there's arguments that you need depth for all of them. And so if there's one of those guys available at the top of your board, it makes sense to shoot that shot. So can't wait to cover the draft. Can't wait to, it's like 3 weeks away somehow. But yeah, we'll be back, like I said, later this week with one of my favorite draft experts to dive deep on some of the Vikings fits, the players that they believe would thrive as Vikings. In the meantime, if you've got questions, throw them at me in the comment section below, whether you're listening on YouTube or Spotify. I know there's a comment section there. You can throw them at me on social media at Alec_Lewis, at Alec Lewis Show. Support First Resource Bank, our presenting sponsor. Check out Unreal, the clothing brand that I'm wearing way too much of. And yeah, don't make fun of me too much for the bacon cantaloupe or the Jerry Jones owners meetings bathroom thing. But you know, you gotta be made fun of sometimes, don't you? That'll do it for episode 153 of the Alec Lewis Show, and we will talk to you guys very, very soon.